Patrick Murphy is my next guest on the Nourished Soul Podcast, and I loved talking to Patrick. So my favorite thing about our conversation is hearing more about Patrick's journey and how he went from a super corporate position into kind of really listening to his own heart, his own calling, doing his own personal work, which is really fascinating to hear some of that too. But then to becoming a women's empowerment coach, and also doing these transformational energy healing and channeling. He does lots of different kinds of things. He's also an entrepreneur. So he just started a new business called Seeing Human, and he's working with corporations to help people in corporations have practical skills for regulating their nervous system, for understanding, having some emotional intelligence, and really helping workplaces become much better places to be. So we talk about all kinds of things. I was going to say woo-woo, some not woo-woo, but really, really fun conversation. And I think it will be very helpful for a lot of people to hear a male voice about healing and doing our own work. All right. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. I'm so glad that Megan connected us. You reached out to her though, right?
Yeah.
You listened to that episode.
I listened to y'all's episode and I was like, oh, these are the conversations that I love to have. And so I was like, I want to have a conversation with Kelli.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited about that because normally I don't jump right to saying, sure, let's, and for some reason, like I got a full body yes. So I'm a generator. You're a manifesting generator, right?
Yeah, I'm an MG. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're an MG. 6'2", right?
Correct.
I'm a 6'2" too. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I
nice.
know. Yeah. So I got the full body yes, and was like, okay. And then had to learn about you. So that was, I
love that. That's such like a beautiful example of like really following your authority, following your intuition, and yeah, just like feeling that yes and just rolling with it. And right. I'm glad you did. Selfishly.
Yeah, me too. And then I was like, oh, Patrick's really interesting. You've had an interesting journey. So I thought maybe we could start there a little bit about, because I know you speak fluent corporate and fluent woo-woo and bring those together. So I was thinking, and you're already, I know you're an entrepreneur, so it's not like you gave up business, but I think you've had an interesting route to the channeling and transformational energy healer. Like how did that come about?
Yeah. So it's a very roundabout story that I will tell as concisely as I can. Mm-hmm. But, I did the typical thing where, I went to, a high school where like you were college bound, like that was it. I mean, it was a college prep school for sure. And then you go to college and you choose a major and you just think that, well, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. First of all. Yeah. But yeah. And then, I entered into a very, very corporate world in my 20s, working for the Wall Street Journal. And I was there for 6 years and I was covering the financial, not as a journalist, but as a advertising sales executive. And, I was working with companies like the New York Stock Exchange and Prudential and a lot of others. And so like in New York City, and it's as corporate as it gets. Right. Mm-hmm. And, eventually I moved to Colorado, and that's really when the deep healing journey started. Like I had been in therapy for years, prior, but I found like the therapist here in Colorado. And that was kind of the beginning of the unwinding, piece, and really finding what spirituality means for me and reclaiming it from all of the religious conditioning and the cultural conditioning, that we are all certainly exposed to varying degrees. And, ultimately landed, this was like in the middle of launching and running my startup for the last 2 years. last year I had a friend just ping me and say, hey, I think you should do this energy healer training. And I was like, this makes no logical sense right now, like zero, because we were in the middle of pivoting my startup, relaunching it. But to your point that you already brought up, like I sat and checked in, because by then I was really aware of, okay, things don't happen by accident. Let me at least give it its due diligence and just pause, check in with my body, check in with my gut feeling, and see what it says. And every time it was a hell yes. Mind you, I did this 10 times over a 2-week period. And it was literally 5 minutes before the deadline to sign up for this training that I finally like pushed the button, right? Because I was like, well, it's like, give me a sign. And it's like, well, let me wait for a signier sign, right?
Right, of course. Like the pinging from a friend isn't enough of a sign. I need like a neon sign.
Yeah. And my gut feeling saying yes 5-10 times before that was still not quite enough.
Right, of course.
But I'm so glad that I did. And I said yes to it. And it was a combination of like I call it somatic breath work. And, as well as like the chakra system and energy work and whatnot. And I had no intentions of becoming, let's say, an energy healer or any of that, but it just opened this whole world. And I had always heard in the back of my head, like, oh, like, hey, you're a healer too. Like you can do this work. Anytime I would go visit one of my practitioners, or, the original version of my startup was actually like a LinkedIn for therapists, alternative medicine practitioners, people in
the
this health and healing world.
Right. Yeah. Got it. Which
is
Inlet. Right.
Inlet. Yeah. I'm actually in the process of winding it down, which we can get into that later. But it was like, oh, like this thing that I've kind of always known was true to a degree, but have never really embraced. Like, well, now it's time to embrace it. And last year, oh man, like talk about a roller coaster. Like we thought 2020 was wild. I mean, for obvious reasons. And yes, it was. But for me personally, 2021 was far crazier. And I think I died, 10 deaths of self.
Right. Yeah.
And had 10 different transformations. And this is very manifesting generator of me, because I was like jumping from thing to thing. And, then all of a sudden, I got kind of really led to work with women specifically, which was like a whole edge for me, because the story I was telling myself was, okay, straight white dude, like you're the problem. You're the patriarchy. You are, like you're not the person to do this. Like it's female practitioners that are the ones that, are supposed to do this. And again, these are all stories I'm telling myself.
Right.
But when I really sat with it, as well as told a few friends about it, they're like, no, you're the exact person who needs to show up. Right. Because until, straight white males start showing up in a more aligned, authentic manner in safety, and not trying to save, not trying to intervene, not trying to really take away anything from the feminine, whether that be pleasure or pain. That's it. That's everything right now. And, even since that moment, my journey has evolved, because I've had multiple women say, hey, can you teach this stuff to men?
Yeah. Can you teach this to my
And so
spouse, dad. Yeah.
Right.
Kid,
exactly.
Somebody.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I'm also doing this work in corporate settings as well.
Right.
And so I've had female teams and groups of, corporate groups of women who I've led workshops for. And every single time they're like, hey, can you teach this to the men too? So that's opening up right now as well, for sure, in a major way. And I'm just really in this period of like the most grounded feeling transition I think I've ever been in. And it's wild.
Yeah. So lots of things are pinging in my head, right? Because I want to talk a little bit more about the channeling too. Like Where did
Yeah.
you suddenly realize you could do that, or you've always been able to do that? And how does that come into the work? We'll start with
Yeah.
that being in my head, and then we'll.
Yeah. I think first of all, like we can all channel. You know, we
Right.
like this
Right.
is where ideas come from.
Right.
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 Like every
Inspiration
new
is
inspiration, every business idea, like that's channeling, whether you believe in it or not. I'm
right.
sorry. and it's really, it's just energy moving, you know?
Right.
And I love
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever read A Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yes.
Phenomenal. Like her philosophy on creativity, right? Like she sees it as this spiritual practice, this spiritual being where your ideas, your books, your writing, you know, any of it, your business has an energy of its own. And, you know, these ideas come to you. And if you don't act on them, they're going to go find somebody else.
Who will. Yeah.
Somebody who will act on it. And so getting back to your question, it's something I've always suspected in myself, but I think mostly through like my very conservative Catholic upbringing.
Yeah, I was going to say Patrick Murphy sounds very Irish
Patrick
Catholic.
William Murphy.
Okay,
yeah, it doesn't get less Irish if you add my middle name in there.
Right. Yeah.
Let's just say I don't tan well.
Yeah. So after that upbringing, and then to be right. So some unwinding of.
Yeah. And and it was just something I've always told myself, oh, you're really intuitive and you can read people well. But there's a difference between saying you're really intuitive and saying you are unintuitive.
True.
And that's really what I've come to embrace in the last year. But it's interesting because I feel like everybody has a story where, you know, once you arrive at the thing or the calling or the moment, you can then immediately look back and see all of the breadcrumbs in your life that you were just following. You didn't know that were going to lead you to this point. And I remember vividly, this was back in college, you know, I'm at University of Georgia. It's right during the start of the Iraq war.
Okay.
And one of my fraternity brothers was in the Marine Reserves, was sent over to Iraq, and then I think it was a Saturday morning. We had, let me back up a little bit. Friday night, I had this dream that my real life brother who was not in the military, like he was in high school at the time, like in Atlanta.
Right.
I had a dream that he was in Iraq, got up, you know, and ran across the field to save a wounded soldier and was shot in the back twice and died. And I woke up right in that moment, like sweating in a panic at this nightmare. And then, you know, grounded myself and I was like, oh, that was just a dream, a really intense one, but it was just a dream. 3 hours later, that Saturday morning, we get a text from, you know, our chapter president saying like, hey, emergency chapter meeting right now, everybody get to the house. And we then learned that our fraternity brother had been shot in the back twice, trying to save somebody in Iraq, and died. And it was one of those moments I never, in that moment, you know, it's a breadcrumb moment, right?
Right.
And it was one of those where I was like, oh, wow, like there is some sort of higher power out there. Like there is, you know, this thing we call spirituality, this thing we call mysticism, you know, this thing we call God, Jesus, Allah, Buddha, whatever anybody wants to call it, it exists. But now I look back and I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. That was like a little bit of a psychic dream. And mind you, I don't walk around telling people, oh, I'm, you know, psychic or an energy healer or whatever. It's kind of one of those things that I just keep in my back pocket and use as a tool because, and I really encourage anybody to do this of cultivate your intuition, cultivate your relationship with your intuition. And that's really all I see it as, you know, and it's like, whether it be the corporate work that I do or the individual, you know, coaching and guiding and healing work that I do, I'll just pause and just check in with the moment. And sometimes, you know, the moment makes no sense in terms of what I'm being told, as our intuition often does.
Right.
But I've learned to trust it more and more. And every time I do, magic happens. And every time I don't, I certainly end up regretting it later. And I'm very clearly shown that, hey, yeah, like you should have followed this. And, and here's why.
Right. And I think those breadcrumbs are interesting. And when you were talking earlier, I was thinking about, some of the things that I'm in the place of looking at. They seem like surprises, sort of, but they, like in addiction, I've been working on, and it's both not that surprising and shocking.
Right.
And you're right. You get to a place where you're looking back and you're like, oh, all the breadcrumbs. And I was thinking, oh, it happens with the good stuff too. Not that addiction is necessary. I mean, it's just not been fun. It's not been pretty. None of it, I think, is all as pretty as we think it's going to be.
No,
there's
it never is.
Never.
It
There's
never
some
is.
messy. And when you're trying to follow, like it took you up until the 5 minutes before it's time to sign up for this. And because your mind is still trying to make sense of it. Your mind is still, your ego is saying, no, this is not what we're doing right now, or all of those things. But I still think of the positive. Like when we get off, I'm going to spend some time thinking about like the positive things that have been shown to me that have been both shocking and also not that surprising. It's funny how those paradoxes stay right together.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's I love that you use the word paradox, because I mean, Brene Brown talks about this, like is being able to hold two competing truths. Yes. That is just core to the human experience. And we fight against it tooth and nail because we want certainty. We want the straight path. We want answers. And we also want those answers, and that whatever truth we believe or we've made up for ourselves, we want confirmation of that. I mean, a la the state of the world right now, just look at politics.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think because every step requires vulnerability, like there is no certainty. So as you step on your path, and the word trust, you used that a second ago, and I was like, oh yeah. So the trusting that your path will rise to meet you. If you take some step, any step really, the path does rise to meet you. And if you miss the breadcrumbs, that's okay, more are thrown. Like it's perfectly okay to keep missing it, because it will come back around for you.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. It's like we don't miss the chance. Like the chance, like we get multiple chances. I mean, especially if it's our, kind of our dharma or our calling or like what our soul came here to do.
Exactly.
The universe gives us, like you said, more breadcrumbs. I think that's so beautiful. And it's just about trusting the next right step. And believe me, this has been a journey for me over the last 2 years. And I was, I had a friend holding space for me in a breathwork journey. I don't know, it was probably about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago. And, I just had this vision of like, we've seen this in movies a million times. Like there's, a group of, people like trying to escape the big monster or the evil wizard or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're running through like a cave system. And then they come to like the edge, like they're coming out of it, but then there's just a cliff and there's no bridge across. Right. And they have to just trust that when they step, the bridge will appear, but there's no evidence for it until it actually happens.
Right.
And like, that was the vision that I got. And it's still something that I'm trying to incorporate every single day, is like, just trust the next right step. Because I have like both the blessing and the curse of being very, very analytical, as well as also very, very creative. And I'm a big thinker. Like I've got big visions, big dreams, big ideas. And my mind immediately, whether it starts with the big idea or it starts with a small idea and becomes a big idea within 3 minutes in a very manifesting generator fashion.
Right.
I then have to pull back and say, okay, well, what's the first step in this? What's the next. right step in this to get to the big vision? But it's hard sometimes because I'm often overwhelmed by the big vision.
Right. That's a good point, because I often have clients visualize either a time in their life when they were well and healthy or what they hope to be, which I would say is on the other side, where there seems to be no bridge, right? There seems to be no path. They can't even, sometimes they can't even imagine themselves on the other side.
Yeah.
But I ask them to do their best to hold that. And if they can think of a character from a book or a movie or something that visualizes that, because I think if you can visualize it, you're more likely to build the bridge. But you're building you're stepping, you've got to have the trust and the ability to withstand the vulnerability of taking this step. But sometimes that might just be really overwhelming for people, when really that vision, I'm thinking that's helpful, right? That the ideas.
Yeah.
But really what they need to do is just visualize taking the next right step, whatever that is.
Right? For sure. And it's both and, right? Like
right?
you need this idea, you need that expander. Lacey Phillips, I don't know if you're familiar with her. Like she has this concept of, she's a manifestation kind of like coach, guru, etc. She has an amazing podcast. Check it out.
Okay.
She has but she gives you language, like the language of manifestation. And one concept that she, has introduced is she just calls it expanders, which is exactly what you were saying. It's the person who already has the thing that you're trying to get, but who maybe looks like you or has the same background as you, or, kind of had maybe a similar path, and, I mean, using different language, like it's just representation, to a certain degree. Right. And while, having that, let's say, vision board or that North Star, person that you're trying to emulate, because here's the thing, like it's very easy for us to look at, let's say like the Brene Browns or the Oprahs or the Tony Robbins or, insert whomever you look up to.
Right.
And it's easy for us to say, oh, well, I'm not that. No, you actually look up to them because you are that. They're just an unblocked version of yourself. They're just a more realized version of what you're trying to get. And that's in you. You wouldn't look up to that person. You wouldn't be inspired by that person if it wasn't in you.
Right. It wouldn't even be on your radar. You're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of people that we don't look up to, and we're just like, nope, like that person doesn't inspire me or whatever. And, you kind of sit here and wonder, you're like, but they've got like millions of followers or, whomever. It's like, okay, it just doesn't resonate with you. And that's fine. Oh, and by the way, like when you're doing your thing, not everyone's going to resonate with you either. And that's okay.
Right. So what do you think when your work and what do we think about the unblocked versions? So it wouldn't even be in us. And that's true about the things that the things about which we are complaining too, right? It wouldn't even be on your radar if it wasn't a part of you, which can be the kicker, right? Because we like to look at the stuff we like, but not the stuff we don't like. So if all that's in us, the blocking, like that's where I think the transformational, it's all energy. So whatever ways we can find to unblock that energy, what do you see the breath work, I'm guessing, is
I mean, breath work is such a huge tool. I mean, there's different tools, I mean, and the thing is there's skills, and two, or one, there's tools you can employ, but there's skills you can build. I mean, obviously with your background, like, this. And I think that, like, I look at my own story and I think about when I first started meditating, and it took me, I was using Headspace, and this was like when Headspace first launched. like over 10 years ago. It took me 90 days to get through the first 30-day Headspace packet, but I stuck with it. And I was one of those people that said, I can never meditate. Like meditation is not a thing that I'm able to do. My mind is too busy. I have too many thoughts, all the stories that so many of us typically tell ourselves about that modality. But it's a practice. And now I'm, 10 plus years into it, and I rarely miss a day. But I'm at the point now where it's like, even just a minute meditation, I can drop in, but that's a skill, that I've had to develop. Anyway, getting back to your question.
No, that's the answer.
Well, actually, no, this is,
but yes.
It's keep going. That's been a part of my journey because it's all about creating the space between that stimulus and the response, and just being able to have just that split second where you get to decide how you're going to respond. And I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest tool for me is really, it's been curiosity. Just get curious about yourself, get curious about the other person. And, because everybody's got their why, whether they know it or not. It might be deep childhood trauma is the reason that, your boyfriend is showing up like, really crappy, or, he's verbally abusive or whatever. And I'm not saying that to like dismiss any of that behavior.
Correct. Yes. Got it.
By any means, I mean, like boundaries are a real necessary thing, as is safety.
Right.
But when we begin to turn inward and do our own work, breath work has been so transformative for me in that, because it really allows you to go deep within yourself and subvert your ego and get into a more malleable state, where concepts like neuroplasticity and, those types of things can be introduced, and take place. And you can literally rewire your brain, your nervous system, in a different manner so that you show up differently. But the key is like, you've got to go in, you got to feel it in order to heal it. Right. And that can be really hard for people sometimes, and that's why we stay stuck. That's why we stay in resistance, to certain things. And that's okay too. Like it'll come when the time is right.
Right. I always say you can't jump off the diving board until you're ready to jump off the diving board, even with a bunch of people around you saying, you got this, we're right here, you can do it. You're not going until you're ready to go. And then one day you're just ready to go. And hopefully you have the support when you decide to go. Because and I think breath work, people think, oh, I don't know. I mean, it's just so simple, but there's some really powerful, even good research. Like sometimes breath work is the only thing that helps with complex trauma.
Right.
So, it seems simple, but it's actually being able to drop in and bypass the ego and drop down. You're right. Yeah. That is something that's a skill, and you can work on that and develop that. And I think, one of the things that's really impressive is that you've done so much work on yourself, and you really wouldn't have even probably made the transition if you hadn't been doing all the work on yourself. So I wanted to talk about that, because from my perspective, we can only journey with somebody where we've been, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
I'm not going to be a guide to someone if I haven't done my own deep work and continue to do that. And well, we'll start there, because then I want to circle back to something that came up in my therapy that you just posted on Instagram, something that's similar. So we'll come back.
I love
to
that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I was like, oh, that's exactly what I was just talking about in my own therapy with my therapist. So some of your work, like doing the one-on-ones and men's group, and talk to me a little about that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of where to start.
I know, right?
Because you're right. I mean, I've done a lot of work, and everything that I'm saying, like I'm on the other side of so much of it right now. But there were times, as recently as 5 years ago that, I mean, I literally looked at my therapist and I was like, when does this get good?
Oh, yeah.
Like, when does life get fun? Like, when do I get to stop feeling this way? Because what I've noticed is, things get messier and, quote unquote, worse before they get better. I mean, and, it's the same with like gut healing. It's the same with so many things, because it's like, we've got to undo and just, I mean, the phrase I use is let it crumble, because there was a moment, it was actually a pivotal moment for me where I was just like in resistance to anger and all of these things that I was feeling. And it was a Saturday morning and I had a to-do list a mile long, which was never even remotely achievable. But I was just like paralyzed by anxiety and like couldn't get out of bed. And I finally just started to let myself cry a little bit, which wasn't a brand new thing. But the new thing was I let myself get angry. And I guess let me back up a little bit to give some context around all of this, because I kind of jumped ahead to like the middle of my healing journey. So I grew up with an alcoholic father who's never been in recovery and still isn't, and a very codependent mother. And we had everything. My dad ran a multi-million-dollar, business. And then it all came crashing down, in late teens and my 20s. But like we went to private schools, we went to, ski trips to Vail every year. And so I knew internally that something was off, but I was like, oh, well, like I don't need anything. Mind you, I needed a lot emotionally, but as we know, right. But that, and I didn't even know, because he was a very functional alcoholic. Because he wasn't like a fifth of Jack a day, pass out on the couch, kind of person. It was like from the time he got off of work to the time he went to bed, he would either have a Budweiser or a glass of wine in his hand. And I didn't even know until it was my early 20s when, my mom mentioned it. And I was like, no, he's not an alcoholic. Like, And then I think it was the second therapist I ever saw, I'm just telling him about stuff. And I was like, wow, my mom says he's an alcoholic, whatever. And he was like, hold on one second. And he goes and prints out a list of just like traits of an adult child of an alcoholic. And I was like, check, 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 check. And then I just sat there and I was like, oh shit.
Right.
And
yeah.
And so, from then on, I'd been in therapy, but like, we're just talking blinding anxiety, like debilitating anxiety at times, some panic attacks, which I weren't actually characterizing as panic attacks at the time. A ton of trouble in relationships. I mean, like codependent numero uno right here. And I mean, I was in a relationship for 3 years that probably shouldn't have lasted longer than 3 months, because I didn't want to break up with her because I felt bad doing it.
Right.
Like that's how codependent I was. And, and certainly like all the other things that come with that, of just like seeing the best in people and seeing the potential in people. It's like, well, welcome to my dating life in my 20s, like a lot of potential, not a lot of like alignment in the moment. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then fast forward to, I moved to Colorado. I'd found the therapist that I, still see today. And I'm actually going to see her in about 3 hours.
I was going to say, isn't that amazing when you find a therapist that you're really aligned with? I mean, I've been with the same therapist for 10 years and people are like, you still going? I was like, oh yeah. Like I will run you over on therapy day. I'm like, get out the way. It's therapy day.
Yeah. For sure. Sure. But and so, getting back to that moment where I just let the anger started to flow. And I was just angry, because the story I was telling myself is, you're not an angry person. Don't be an angry person. And which is very different than just letting anger flow, and even somebody who would be labeled as an angry person, well, like they've got a bunch of pent up anger and they just need to let it flow. Like emotions are just data. Like they're not who we are.
Right.
They're just what needs to be seen and witnessed in the moment.
Right.
Or at least seen in the moment and saying, hey, we can't do this
Not right now.
I'll get back to you later.
Yes. But
like,
then get back.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So yeah, I just started to wail on some pillows and was just letting it flow. And I just heard the words, let it crumble, let it crumble, let it crumble. And it was just this, like, everything that you've constructed, whether it be the coping mechanisms or, the things that kept you safe or the stories you've told yourself, you've got to let it crumble, because then you can sweep away the rubble and rebuild it in the intentional way that you want to live your life. You can create yourself versus curating yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, so much of what therapy has been is unpacking, like unpacking things that I didn't even know I took on. And the visual that I would see personally, and I also professionally, is that we pack on all of these identities, like the things that people tell us we should be, things we've decided somewhere along the way we're good, titles, jobs, like relationships, all this stuff, and we're contorted. Like it really feels like we're contorted. And so then doing the work, whatever that looks like, therapy, self-help, whatever, but you start unpacking it so that you can find alignment. So you're not so contorted anymore once you start unpacking the things, and you can say, oh, I'd like to keep that. No, I like that about me, or I want to keep that. And sometimes titles, you're right, things have to crumble, like whether you want them to stay or not, they're going. Because I feel like once you say yes to alignment with your soul, or whatever people want to call that, you say yes to life on life's terms. What is in the way, what's a problem for your soul or your life, is going. And where I see suffering is when we cling. Like cling to a relationship or a title or a something. And then we feel it's going to hurt when it's ripped away because it's crumbling.
Yeah.
And I think it's normal to cling to things.
Oh, for sure. And it's safety.
And it does feel very disorienting when things are crumbling. I don't know about your experience, but I was like, wait, I wanted freedom. Freedom feels like really disorienting, really scary at times. So. Yeah.
There's just so many layers to that, because one, you mentioned the clinging to things. That's just safety. Like even, we think about, well, okay, here's a story. So like, this is how codependent I was. And like, this is just a really solid representation of where I was and just how far I've come. And this was 6 years ago. I had started dating somebody here in Colorado, and it was very much one of those like trauma bond relationships where you're like saying I love you within like 3 or 4 weeks, and like, yep, you're the one, and blah 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 blah, and just sparks flying everywhere. And I was sitting on the couch telling a story to her. I was mid-story, mid-sentence, and she just looks at me, puts her finger up to her lips, and just goes, okay, shh, and just kind of waves me down and picks up a book and just starts reading it. And I don't think I've ever felt so small than I did in that moment. But I internalized that as, oh, I guess that wasn't a good story, or maybe it was too long, or whatever. She did this 2 other times. Mind you, I was telling my therapist about it, and we had just started working together. Now we've been together for so long, like she would just be like, nope, cut that off. Like she would just tell me. But, at the time she was like, well, and how did that make you feel? And I was like, well, I guess it was a bad story. And I was doing the thing where I was thinking it was my fault. When what I should have done is just walked out the door.
Well, or even dropped in, like you were doing the head thing. Well, I guess that it was me, and it's not a good story, and I shouldn't, as opposed to like drop into your heart. Like, hello, no, that hurts.
Totally.
That's not feeling good. Right.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I've told a handful of friends that story,
Mhm.
and this is years ago, but they'd be like, they just can't imagine, because that's not how I would go through my normal life. It's like I'm very successful, like was working for the Wall Street Journal, doing all these things.
Yeah.
And then that's happening behind the scenes. And it's just this wild, like, kind of perfect depiction of like, well, this is what our lives are like sometimes. Like what's on the surface isn't always, rarely is, what is actually happening behind the scenes. And
Right.
I forget what the original question was. I apologize.
No,
I
me
launched into
too.
that
No,
story
I
for a
like,
reason.
no, I like all of that though. Cause I think, I think people, we all have some facade thing that our lives seem pretty good. Not sometimes people doesn't look very good on the outside, right? But then the
Right.
inside is the crumble. I think that's the piece when you let it crumble, let it
Yeah.
go. That's where we were. Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing though. And like we still dated for another 5
Oh,
months
you were
after that.
clinging. That's what
And
you
yeah, and that's the thing. I was clinging, but it was like, it's the devil versus the devil you don't.
right.
And that's why we stay in, harmful relationships or dysfunctional relationships, because it's often scarier to just be alone.
Right.
And I think that that's what happens when you let things crumble, is like things get really unfamiliar.
Yes.
When you allow things to crumble, because those coping mechanisms, those safety mechanisms, like the stories, the relationships, the friendships, whatever it might be that you're letting crumble, it was still like that served you at some point.
Sure. So you can honor that it was helpful at some point.
Yeah, that served you at some point, but it's crumbling because it doesn't serve you now. But the next thing hasn't come in yet.
Right.
And so you're letting things crumble, and you're just seeing a bunch of rubble, which really, like, you're seeing, largely it's like emotionally, right? But sometimes it's actually physical. I mean, whether it be like, physical, like purging, your body's going through, whatever it is to just get rid of all the toxins or whatever it was, if you're doing gut health healing or whatever. It could be relationships, could be friendships, whatever. But you're just seeing like your life in ruins almost. And I'm using that, a little bit hyperbolic. And I'm not saying this to scare people. I'm actually saying this to like tell people like, it's okay. That's the bravest, most courageous, most caring, compassionate thing you can ever do for yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Is to just let it crumble. But it can be profoundly unsettling and very lonely at times. And that's also okay. And, for those, like, it's just so key to have a support system if that is available to you. And if it's not, like, figure it out,
Create
like find,
yeah.
find your people. But the problem is, it's like, well, you don't even know who you are in that moment anymore. So finding your people is also a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I'm really just sharing all of this to just say, like, the mess is okay.
Yeah.
Like the mess is necessary for the healing to take place, for the transformation to take place, for, the freedom to take place. Because once you clear that space, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, etc., you get to choose. You get to decide, because you can take all that rubble and maybe temporarily build a fort, like in your living room. I love visuals. It's like, like with, when we were little kids, like we build forts in the living room, right?
Yep.
It's like, do that and just be in that fort for a little while and just make a list and decide who gets to come in and play and who doesn't.
Boundaries. Yeah.
Boundaries.
What's okay? Who's okay? And I think, living in the rubble can be hard for people for a little bit, but also you're right. Because when it gets back to the trust the next right step.
Yes.
That in the rubble, you will find your way. It just doesn't always like that, but yeah.
Well, and in the rubble, you will find yourself.
That, more
because
importantly.
we are, you're going to find your wholeness. It's just a journey back to your wholeness, because I believe that we are all whole.
Yes, I agree.
But you mentioned earlier, you know, we get a lot of things that just kind of get attached on, or belief systems or whatever that cloud and block that wholeness. And that's what that crumbling part is about. It's just standing there and it's just you with you, which can be really unsettling at first, especially because you're like, wow, I really am powerful. I really am worth it. I really am worthy of love. I really am, you know, insert whatever you are in that moment. And when we return to our power, that can be really scary.
Yeah. Which kind of gets me to where what I was talking with my therapist, we were talking about how the passion and the wound are right up against each other. So I think that's also the place of the power, right? But these passions and wounds are next to each other, and there you are with yourself in this place. And so one of your posts recently was similar. I'm probably going to butcher it. No, our greatest gifts and deepest wounds reside together, or in the same area,
in the same place,
in the same space. Yeah. And I think that's what's really scary for people, is that, and I guess we don't always realize that the wound and the passion, that's how it works. And that trust is what's needed there, because you can't even take a step and you can't move forward with the passion and the wound together if you don't have trust in yourself, trust in something maybe bigger than yourself.
Yeah. Well, and very often we are like, that passion doesn't necessarily, you know, it doesn't die. It doesn't go away per se, but you are embodying it through the wound at first, until you look at that. And so it's coming out in maybe a misaligned way or a maladaptive way. Right. And like, well, I'll just share one of mine. So when I was 15 years old, I just got my learner's permit, and I was like hopping in the car to drive somewhere with my dad. We're pulling out of the driveway and he pops open a beer. And mind you, I did not know drinking and driving was illegal until I read it in the driver's manual, because I'd literally seen it my whole life. And I said, no, Dad, you can't have that. Put it away. And he was like, no, it's fine. Keep driving. And I said, no, you cannot have that. If we get pulled over, I will go to jail because you have an open container in your car. And this just escalated into a knockdown, drag out fight that ended up, you know, right outside of our neighborhood. I'd pulled over. We're in the parking lot of the gas station, and he's just yelling at me, you know, saying I'm disobedient, saying I'm, you know, a bad son, and, you know, all these different things. And I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place of obey your father and your mother and obey the law. And I've got to choose one. But in that moment, subconsciously, what I chose was, you can't speak your truth. And you certainly can't speak your truth to power. And so, me being a very vocal human being for the most part, I started to hide parts of myself. And, you know, and this continued into my 20s and, you know, early 30s, where, you know, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like, I'm a big thinker. I've got big ideas, but I would shrink them down to fit that middle 50%, so they would be more accepted. Or maybe I wouldn't say them at all. And I certainly wouldn't speak truth to power, even if I knew in the moment and everybody else knew that that person was wrong, you know, and that person needed to be, you know, corrected or, you know, directed in another way, or just informed. And like, so, but, you know, now I sit here and, you know, I'm on stages, I'm doing facilitation work, I'm doing, you know, mind you, I've done all of this to a degree, you know, my entire life, going back to the breadcrumbs. Exactly. But now it's like, no, I'm not holding back anything.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of the passion to speak your truth. This passion, even just to speak, like to be out there speaking, doing your thing, is right up against that wound, like right up
Yeah.
against so that's a nice example. And I also, I feel like it might be time to ask you, since you're somebody who's giving back a lot, what do you do to nourish your soul? So you're doing a lot, you do your own work and therapy and that, but what else nourishes your soul?
I think the biggest thing for me is nature.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a constant battle for me to just allow myself that time, because, I can very often just kind of get in these loops of, oh, well, I'm creating these things and I've got to keep working towards it. And it's all fun for me. But, there's a tipping point where it's like, no, if you're burnt out and you're not taking care of yourself, it becomes not fun. So I actually spent this entire past weekend working in my yard. Mind you, I've owned my house for almost 7 years now. My yard is largely a disaster still, because it's one of those things that's so overwhelming to tackle that I've just been like, well, if I don't do anything, it's better. But I got my hands really dirty. I mean, my whole body was covered in dirt and, built some garden beds and planted a bunch of things and, just, like really just tuned out. And I didn't listen to any podcasts, and I didn't, wasn't doing any like kind of this constant self-development work. Cause like typically I'm kind of like, oh, well, if I'm like digging the plot for the garden bed, like I can just pop on a podcast and learn something right now. No, just slow down and pause and learn something from the earth. Learn something from nature.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I hear nature as a source for people nourishing their soul. And it's really where I am now too, doing a lot of earthing back to like putting our feet and getting dirty, putting our feet on the earth. So that's beautiful. I think that's a good place for you to nourish your soul, because I think as a manifesting generator, you can go, 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 go.
Yes.
Like I'm the same. The generator energy can be the Energizer bunny if you're lit up by what you're doing. And so to really take the time and the space to say, right now, I'm going to soak in what nature has to offer. I think that's important.
And just allowing ourselves to receive, for so many of us, like, especially those of us that are in like healing or facilitating professions and whatever, like it's just so easy for us, because it lights me up to do this work, and I've discovered that, like, even in casual conversation with people, that they'll kind of crack open sometimes, and I've had a lot of people start to kind of reflect that back to me, because like they just feel really seen. And like that's one of my gifts, but it's like it doesn't have to be an always on thing, and I want to be seen too.
Right to be able to receive that. There's a beautiful heart meditation where and it's kind of like, the meditations where we're giving out a lot, and you see a young you, and then you see yourself in now, or those kinds of things, and you're giving, but then to circle it back, to bring the love that you're pushing out there, to circle it back into your own back. Because I think that's an important piece, that particularly healers and wellness workers, and we're giving a lot, and then to be able to have that kind of support. So so that's beautiful.
For sure.
I love it. Anything, we have a few more minutes. I was trying to think if there's anything else that you feel like would be really important for people to know about you, or I will make sure people know how to get in touch with you.
Thanks. Let's see, what should people know about me? I'm so passionate right now about the corporate facilitation work, because I don't think, like, we're not going to change culture until we change work. And, you look at the Great Resignation, right? Of so many people that are leaving their jobs and choosing to be unemployed for a time because they're like, well, that's better than what I was going through. And I think we're going through this great upheaval where like people are letting things crumble and they're coming back to themselves and they're getting a little more choosy about like, this is what I want to do. But
in the fort, who can play? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But I think the ability to regulate one's nervous system is the most underrated business skill that anybody can have. And I look back at, my 20s and, certainly my early 30s and just think, oh my gosh, like if I had had the skills that I have now, how different things could have been, because like just how much less dramatic, because like I grew up, my household was chaotic at times growing up. And so it's like, I needed to find that and create that over and over again, because that's what my nervous system was used to. Because in silence, in calm, I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I'm bracing for the next thing, or I was bracing for the next thing. And so, yeah, I'm really passionate about bringing these concepts into the corporate space in a very business friendly way. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It's like I speak full corporate and I speak full woo woo, and I can translate between the two. And forget woo woo, like so much of what I teach, it's backed by, it's not this like big ethereal like, oh, I just like sat and channeled this in. Like, no, this is backed by neuroscience. It's backed by research. Right. And I'm teaching real time, like skills that can be used in real time. It's not like you need to go and sit in your car and meditate for 10 minutes.
Right.
You can literally employ these skills in the middle of a business meeting, in the middle of a day, and come back to yourself, come back to your center, come back to your gifts, and operate from that place. Operate from a place of your truth and rise from there.
Yeah. I think you're right, though. I think I think everything is changing, right?
Yes.
So we're in a big changing phase. And I think corporations are going to, everything is going to have to shift. And you're right. Most of us come from some sort of chaotic background. And so we're creating these chaotic, and then nobody wants to be in that. So, yeah. So we're going to have to. And I think when your nervous system is regulated, you're right. You're able to respond. We create that space between the stimulus and reaction. So if you're a reactor, you create the space so you can respond. And then you work on boundaries, and your communication can change. All kinds of things can happen. And really hard conversations can then take place in a safe way. So that
right. And that's a skill. Like there's a container that you can create, and there's an intention that you can bring into it and just say, hey, we're going to have a hard conversation. It's going to get messy, but let's just be in the mess together, knowing we're going to come out of this on the other side. And it can be as simple as that. And again, like it's simple, but it also takes practice. If you're not used to that, if you're not used to sitting with that discomfort, and really at the end of the day, I'm launching what I'm calling Seeing Human. And it's just it starts with seeing yourself on a deeper level through the lens of curiosity, compassion, and self-care, such that you can then see others through that same lens. And we can connect with ourselves and with each other on a deeper level. Because if there's one thing we need right now, it is connection.
Right. Yeah. And I think when you're done with corporate, if you could move over to the politicians and the whole political world. Right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother, right?
I know,
think
right?
The best way I can sum that up, it was like The Onion posted this years ago, and it said, it was like Washington, D.C. conducts controlled burn, for, ridding itself of, corrupt policy or whatever it was. And I was like, yeah, that's actually not a terrible idea.
But we've got to live through the crumble, right? We're in this big transformational space. Yeah. The world is changing. Corporate, we're in a really exciting time, but it's got to crumble so that we can.
Which is painful. It's crumbling of institutions, it's crumbling of beliefs, it's crumbling of ways of being. And like anything built poorly needs to crumble. plain and simple. But like, we kind of put a lot of these things that were built poorly up on a pedestal, whether we chose to or not,
Right.
and,
Right.
and, I just want to acknowledge that pain that anybody might be going through in this. And it's not easy, I mean, we all know it's like, I'm preaching the choir here with everybody listening of like, yeah, the last 2 years, like, no, they haven't been easy, but look at what has been exposed that needs to be fixed, that needs to crumble, that needs to change.
Right.
And that's hard. It's really difficult because the first step really is just letting it crumble.
Yeah. It's also exciting because then,
I'm with you. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I totally agree.
I'm like,
I totally agree.
Let it burn.
I feel like I made myself sound like this like doomsday person, talking about like,
I don't think
it's like painful or whatever.
No,
I
think it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah. Like, I think it's just important to acknowledge of like, no, it's not just like butterflies and rainbows when you like start transforming or whatever. It's just, there is that period of, things are changing, things are shifting, it's uncertain, etc. But I'm with you. I think it is very, very exciting.
Well, and I think when you've been through enough crumbling, and you realize that it really is like the butterfly has to the caterpillar has to liquefy in order to become like, it basically eats itself to become the butterfly. Then you're like, okay. And when you've been through that enough times and felt the butterflyness of like how light and free things can get, you're like, okay, so when it comes around again for you to cocoon, because you're going through another transformation, it's not quite as scary because you're like, oh, here we go again.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And that's, I mean, you and I both sit in that place, where we've been through that so many times. And so I'm like wholly with you on that. And I love it. And I think it's beautiful.
I do too. Yeah. And I think it's a really honor. It's an honor for me. I know it's an honor for you to sit with people, to companion people on their journey through the crumbling and the rebuilding and the choosing. And right.
Every time. Like, there's nothing more beautiful or courageous to me than seeing somebody just go there, just go to that place within themselves that is hard, that's scary, that's in their shadow, that they've maybe buried, but face it. And then seeing their energy shift on the other side. Like, they're usually exhausted, but something's changed. Like, their spirit is sitting taller.
Yes.
And their energy is more expansive, and they're standing on the scar of what was once a wound. But now that scar is firm ground that they can stand on. And they're just saying, look at where I've been and look at where I'm at now.
Beautiful. I love that imagery. I'll be thinking about that, standing on those scars. So I am so grateful for your time, Patrick. It's been so great to talk to you. We could go
Likewise.
on and on, I think. So I just, I think it'll be really great for people to hear this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.